If you go to any culture in Africa and you type in the word cannibalism after that culture on YouTube, you will be flooded by stories about cannibalism in the mythologies and oral culture of Africans that are recorded by certain people who come from those specific cultures. And I do not need to get into all of them, but one oral culture that is world famous, but for some reason people don't know this, is the zombie. Now, the word zim or zombo or zimbi is the oral culture of cannibalism all over Africa. These stories that had terrified Africans for years, because some of them were actually linked to mythology rather than fairy tales, though most of them were fairy tales, they depict something very interesting, and that is the fact that they transferred to the West, and a lot of them came with this duality because, of course, the West African one are mainly tied to voodoo, while the Central African one are tied to a sort of free zombie that operates by itself. Now, voodoo in these places, or at least the concept of voodoo that is about resurrecting zombies, is the same everywhere. I mean, firstly, throughout Earth, the idea of being a necromancer is a theme, but in Africa specifically, this is a theme with these zombie like creatures. And that's what made them particularly dangerous because there's two types that are very popular. One is the female cannibals that eat people. This is only one. The second is the male cannibals that are resurrected by a female witch or someone of that type. Now, this is different than a witch doctor. A witch doctor is a traditional healer. A witch is someone who wishes to bring bad things onto people. The oral histories, and they're still around today. People still believe this today. Now, just like the worship of Kali in India, who can be seen as positive and negative, this wasn't always the case that they saw this person or these people as necessarily negative, especially if you look at a group like the Imbangala of Congo, who themselves were cannibals and they even practiced infanticide ritually. This group, the Mbangala, would be the group of people recorded in the 16th century that would make the Portuguese return slaves after the Portuguese had hired the Mbangala to go and fight the Kingdom of Congo. This Kingdom of Congo would be sliced a little bit by the Mbangala, but they'd effectively win. But things got so tragic that the Portuguese were like, this is bad, because these Mbangala were Spartan like in their behavior. And so they not only killed and ate some of the people of Congo, they also ate people who are Portuguese who were on their side because of their ways. At least that's what is recorded. And that is what comes through from the oral history. So, as you can see here, it could be considered a completely negative thing, but at the same time, it could also be considered a positive thing by people who ritualize stuff like this. So, if we return to the question, why is it that they took something like this so seriously? It's because there were serious tribes that were few and far between, but were real and present, that were there and could cannibalize on a human being, thus making these stories extremely real outside of the mythology, outside of the fairy tales, and outside of everything else. And not to mention that there were agents or bad people who would engage in this because it was set in the mythology at some point. This is why there were groups that would outshoot from some people and then they would embrace the cannibalism side because it came with the original mythology, and it would be interpreted as negative or positive depending on the tribe itself, but 90% of the time it would be considered extremely negative. This history, oral as it was translated by Europeans to their movies. And you can see here in their movies that the earliest zombies, and some of these movies have been completely erased in history, even though they're written down, reviews and stuff like that still exist that remind us of their existence. These movies depict first and foremost, almost as a requirement of this genre, that the zombies be black and they be attached to things like voodoo or dark magic or anything like that, or even light magic that is traditional in those regions, because a lot of these people did their research before they made it. So much so they were associated with black culture and black people, giving jobs to black people back then to be in movies, that they would be a movie called White Zombie, which would be probably one of the earliest to introduce the concept of zombieism being played by Europeans, which now today we usually associated with them, with movies like World War Z, The Mummy, all these things. We associate zombies and stuff like that with Europeans today. But in real life, the origin of it was black movies, and it was a requirement in the. It's like sci-fi. Like, you can't do sci-fi without adding science. Zombie genres in the beginning, you couldn't do them without adding African people. But this all changed, obviously, and which is fine. They're mythological creatures, which is why it's hilarious why when it was their turn and mermaids were going to be depicted as one black person, they freaked out, the Europeans, when it too is a mythological creature. Now, I've heard from some people say, well, you can't just change someone's race in the middle of a thing for a sequel. Well, except the original Ariel was supposed to be about a blonde. I wish I could play the video, the behind the scenes, where the person shows that they changed the hair color on a whim. She was originally going to be a blonde, and this had nothing to do with Scandinavia or anything like that. It just had to do with the color that they chose first, and they changed it to red because it was more appealing on camera. So this thing of like it's this too true to culture thing is not real. They arbitrarily chose a color, and this is funny because in the African version, which by the way Africans are not complaining, I'm not even complaining. You could take any mythological thing in Africa and switch it and put Europeans, and most Africans won't complain. For example, the mummy. But for some reason, you take European fictional fake characters who don't exist and can really be depicted by anybody, and they freak out. Now, what does White Zombie tell us about the history of these zombies? Now, of course, they've already told us that the previous ones of the genre were almost automatically black Africans, and by naming it White Zombie, they've done us a huge favor, because anybody who tries to go against this history is immediately shut down because there is obvious evidence of where it came from. Not to mention that the words, some people would try and pull this, it's a coincidence thing, the name zombie and zumbi in all of these languages, which by the way is a lot of languages. It's usually Bantu and Niger languages that have this word. We also have, of course, zombies, cannibal like people, depicted in other areas of Africa. For example, Konsu in ancient Egypt is a basically a cannibal, and also you have Degdare, who is another cannibal. Now, I want to state that this zombie, this undead zombie, is only one version of a zombie in Africa, where but they went with that as the majority of the zombie in the Americas. But in Africa, the zombie theme, the name zombie, can go for anything. It can go for a living woman who gains her powers through eating other human beings. And most of the time, like I showed you with Dick Dare in the previous video, and I showed you with Zwanende, this happened. Now, here's the thing, the theme usually in the West is that they are brainless and all they want is food and stuff like that, which is true within this one version of the voodoo type. While they add stuff like, because of illness and stuff like that, they've kind of gone away from they're just necromantically brought back to life. and they've sort of gone into things like diseases and stuff like that. Night of the Living Dead is one of the first to ever do this to this type of story to try and, to be honest, get it away from its original theme. Now, as much as these people did their research on these zombies, they did not do more research into the religions and find out things that are way deeper than this. Because, of course, the reason why these people are able to be brought back from history is because there is a symbolism culture in Africa, one that I will talk about at length by showing a video that I played a long time ago, but I'll bring it back. But this symbolism culture is one that brings rituals in, and if you've ever seen anything about voodoos and puppets and stuff like that, Africa has had the mythologies. And this is why the mythology of Africa is not like Christianity or any of these other religions that have gods and stuff like that necessarily. But it has these symbols and items and totems which are themselves believed to be alive. This is different than a lot of religions, which they don't believe the totem itself to be alive. In Africa, the totems are believed to be alive. And so, if we move away from this zombie thing, right, and we go into the other things, we find people talking about certain items that you should not bring into the house. Obviously, animism is great and stuff like that. But let's look at this symbolism culture now. Remove your brain away from just just the mythology culture of it, because there's something deeper going on that has something to do more with just the ritualistic writing systems of Africa, pre-colonial writing systems of Africa. Now, before I go into these pre-colonial writing systems, remember that a lot of them were informed by oral culture, and so Europeans who documented them, not Africans, Europeans who documented them, they downplayed them. And by the way, the people who say they downplayed them today, in the 21st century, and I want you to remember this, I'm not making any of this stuff up. This is information coming from the Europeans themselves. They downplayed the meanings of these symbols. So before I show you the symbols, remember that this isn't all their meanings, because a lot of their meanings had to do with mythology, and they had to do so. For example, certain people in Africa wouldn't, would try to avoid certain colors, not because they were whatever, but because it was tied to some type of mythology and stuff, and they would replace things. Certain people would try not to use certain names, so certain symbols that would be used. These are the writing systems, and these writing systems were used in a very difficult way. Today, we do not even know the full extent that they were used for. Some people even speculate that they were alphabets, or at least alphabet like. An example of these symbol cultures are the Benin plaques. These Benin plaques that were arranged in a certain way to tell a story. So it's like a movie. It's like from one to the next to the next to the next to the next would tell a story, but the story is lost because, of course, it's been generations since the original people who made the story saw them. So we don't even know what order they were in, because the Europeans, when they collected them, they just jumbled them up, took them off the wall, jumbled them up, and just put them however they wanted to. And then now the story is lost. It's like, how do you know what the narrative was telling, and how do you know if which part is mythology and which part is actual recording of actual history? And this is the same with a lot of these symbolisms and things in our culture that we find. It's almost like today, if we, let's say we found 1,000 books from Europe, right? And we just started ripping out pages and we just jumbled them up, and we lost a lot. So let's say in Shakespeare, like William, whatever, we take William Shakespeare's book, like Romeo and Juliet, we rip 10 pages, put it in a pocket, go to another book, rip out 10 pages, put it in the pocket. Some other guy takes 10 pages, puts it in his pocket. And so now we're trying to piece a story together from majority missing pages from different books that have nothing to do with each other, and then we have to try and decide which ones go together and which ones don't go together. It's not impossible, but it's hard, especially if you don't have the rest of the story. But these symbols nonetheless are recorded in a specific way. But like I said, this is like reading a book without all the pages. Or the Bakuba kingdom. These textiles apply geometric patterns, and depending on how it's written, these patterns have been used to deduce some historical facts, as these were culturally significant symbols. And using this many geometric patterns in clothing, as you can see, it makes for a very intricate design. It's not a Bakuba thing, which is in the Congolese area. It's not just a Bakuba thing. I will show you that geometric patterns were used in ancient Egypt, in West Africa, in Southern Africa, in East Africa as a symbolic thing, especially zigzags, diamonds, triangles. These are the type of symbols that were used in order to portray messages. In other cultures, of course, you have geometric patterns, but they don't resemble the same thing. Instead of symbols of writing like the you find in Africa, they are used in some places as, like in Arabia, as to show mathematical precision. So let's start with West Africa. We already know that West Africans used their clothes for symbolic texting or sending messages, is more of a better way of saying it.
The designs in this kente fabric originated from the Ashanti people in Ghana, West Africa. The name comes from the Ashanti word kenten, which means basket because of its woven look. The origins date back to the 12th century, and this fabric has traditionally been worn by royalty, kings and queens, and other important figures during ceremonial events. There are many different designs. Each design has a different historical, philosophical, or moral meaning. We will look at just two of these now. This first design represents aspiration, noble deeds, or sharing. The Ashanti name for this literally means one who climbs a tree worth climbing gets the help deserved. The meaning is that anyone who performs a noble deed deserves the support of the community.
Now, East Africa is one of those regions in Africa that maintains a lot of African culture. So East Africa also has a significance when it comes to the patterns on clothes. But East Africa, because they had writing, gears, long time ago, they actually preserved what some of these writings meant. And a lot of them had to do with magical spells. And as you saw with the Nigerian one, a lot of these are omens or, let's say, miracle type stuff where they're trying to give you thanks or trying to immunize you against something in the natural world. And in Ethiopia, you find this in spades back in the day. By the way, this is from the old Ethiopian kingdom. We find a book that talks about the difference between just normal patterns and these geometric patterns that are used for casting spells that you put on clothes in order for them to work. The short illustrated blog will explore some magic and divination in Ethiopian manuscripts and other items such as amulets from the collection, making use of images from some of the best examples of the manuscript and amulets scrolls in British library collections, as well as containing spells, charts, magical squares, and numbers. These manuscripts are adorned with rich illustrations for an introduction to the amulets. And as you can see, there's all these patterns. And then, of course, because they have illustration, you can write something. And of course, they have numbers because they had mathematics.
Have been recorded. So my final theme for my little natter today has to do with the presentation of images. There's another glorious picture of Archangel Michael. And what I really like about this image is that he's multi-armed. Okay, so we have two arms up here fighting the demons, and yet there are other arms down here holding kind of another sword. Okay. As I mentioned previously in relationship to thinking about geometric designs, we need to be careful of automatically bringing our contemporary scopic regimes, that is our everyday ways of viewing things, to look at texts and images produced in quite different cultural contexts. Like much ritual image culture, images in this context have agency. That is, that they're attributed a liveliness or a capacity to do stuff. They are magical. That is, they're imbued with a power whose source is considered to be otherworldly or metaphysical. So they are not illustrations or harmless diagrams. Now, this is a very different way of thinking about images. We might be familiar with images affecting us emotionally, bringing us joy or happiness or rapture or rest, looking at all those cat images online in the middle of the day, or peacefulness or something like that. But it's a less familiar idea that the images can either be, one, ontological, that is, that they can actually be the being. Okay? That is, they're not a picture of a particular spirit being that it looks like, but it actually is that being. Okay? The spirit being taking up residence or is formed by the image. And secondly, that the images are capable of direct action, which affects the person or people directly. So, for example, they can heal an illness, they can make them full of lust with love magic, I'll give an example of that later, or they can do much nastier things, which I won't be talking about.
As you can see, cloth and patterns, geometric patterns, are said to be very influential and very linguistic and very alive, as I showed you in the kente cloth. But I will also go back to West Africa because we need to address the magical elements of these patterns in West Africa. But we shall read. And in a study, it says, scrolls are often carried with people, hung by string. Women must not wear them during menstruation or after sex. Scrolls under the pillow can stave off nightmares. They assist deep breathing and prayer. They seem to be refreshed by having the priest read the scroll on a visit. Sometimes scrolls are put on the certain central post of a house facing the door. As you can see on the manuscript, there are people wearing white cloth and they have borders around them. These borders are not merely just borders. A lot of them, again, would be spells or stuff like that. But then some of them were merely documents, a pre-Ge'ez way of writing. And this writing can tell you about historical events, rank, power, all kinds of things, just like the other African cultures. And you can see there that these are geometric patterns. Very common, these squares, these diamonds. This clearly has a Christian bend to it with all these crosses, or an Ethiopian Christian bend with all the crosses, because the crosses of this kind existed in Ethiopia prior to Christianity.
Letter itself, it's called Utate. It means take me. So this is the first love letter that the girl will have to make to the boy after proposing for many times, and then at the end the girl agreed, and then each color on top, that's where the letter is, that's where all the message is. And then the triangle facing down, it's a symbol of man. So the lady, she's saying, you are man enough to be my husband.
And then there's another letter.
The second letter, it's called a love letter as well, but it's got a special name called Itemba. It means my hope. And then it's got the designs, those designs, it's called shield design. So it means the woman is saying here, you are my hope, so I'm protected since I've got you as my loved one.
And then the third love letter is the two triangles.
Yes, only look at me, not to other ladies. So I've decided that I love you and you have to look only at me. That's why those things are facing each other.
And how about the colors?
The colors, you've got the green. And in this case, like she is saying, I know that you're not with me, working far away, but I'll wait. Green is a symbol of waiting. So like if you see water and on the rivers, you saw those stones against the river, because the water keep on bumping to those stones, they turn into green. So that's how they use green as a symbol of waiting, because like wherever he left wherever he left the woman, she will just be there until he comes back from the white people where he will be working in. Why I'm saying
that's the orange.
working on the white people, because it's got the orange, which means iPutukezi. So in Zulu, we transfer it as iPutukezi as white people, because those were the people that we normally, our fathers and grandfathers would go to Joburg or Durban to work in mines with them. And then the blue color, it's symbolizing of missing someone. She would be missing the one that she loved, but what can she do? She will wait because she's there to work for the family.
And then the final love letter, which is on top.
That was the latest love letter that she made when they start like putting words now like alphabets. Izazi are the wise men. So she is referring to his husband as one of the wise men, and she will always love and wait for her, for him. Yeah.
And the other love letter, which is dimensional, shows the man and the woman.
It's
marriage.
Yes, yes, and it's got those triangle also that you see on that love letter. It's more like emphasizing that, yeah, when I said look only on me, and then it's on a euphorbia tree design. So it's a special design that's common from the area of Ishowe and surrounding.
And we have installed the love letters from earliest to latest, bottom to top, which is the way they would be worn.
Yes.
Like the Ethiopian one, when the Europeans got to Africa and they found these symbols, some of the people became educated in reading and writing in English or in English symbols. And as you can see with this Zulu pattern and translation, it has the word Izazi, which means knowledge or knowers. And this is the reason why this pattern is not that popular anymore, because most people became literate in Africa, and so they didn't need 1,000 beads that would cost them their entire life in order to send letters anymore.
The colourful beadwork made and worn by all Zulu girls is far more than just a charming decoration, for a whole secret language lies behind the arrangement of these bright colours and gay patterns. Messages of constancy to an absent lover, or of reproach to a faithless suitor. All the schemes and plans of a designing Zulu maiden.
To the observant of you, you will notice that the kente cloth, the Zulu beads, the Kuba Kingdom graphic designs on clothes, and the Ethiopian borders that have these zigzag triangle patterns, they have this computer look about them, this digital look about them. And the reason why they have this is because of a true dedication to accurate geometry. And because of this accurate geometry, it looks like it's designed by a computer. It almost looks pixelated. But this is due to geometry. This is true African similarities. And in Egypt, it's just everywhere. Due to the repetition of these patterns, they create a fractal pattern. And as you can see with the Ethiopian crosses, they look like 4 fractals just fractaling out of each other. But again, this is a digital or a graphical feature that is common within all these cultures. And as you can see, it's not just held down in fabrics, it's in talismans, it's in all kinds of things that you would put on your body. And that's the key, to put it on your body so that it works on you.
Bakuba textiles are a medium for a visual symbolic language which communicates cultural ideas through artistic expression. Their raffia cloth textiles weave together this society through the cloth's utilitarian, economic, spiritual, and social functions. Now that we understand the functions of raffia cloth, let's take a closer look at the inventive designs for which the Bakuba are particularly known for. I will discuss the design's origins, formal elements, styles, and their symbolic significance in this African society. Bakuba textile designs were born of several influences, really taking shape over their long history as something unique to the Bakuba. Bakuba designs are akin to the flow of music and dance, with rhythmic play of shape and line, accentuated form and unified pattern, all balanced within their spatial complexity. All of this is intriguing, but it is the formal qualities of the design which elevate these textiles as exceptional works of art. Patterns are produced from the manipulation of three elements, that is, line, color, and texture. Line is used to create shape and give the feeling of movement within a piece. Shapes are almost always geometric and rectilinear, favoring triangles, lozenge shapes or diamonds, and rectangles. The predominant colors used, and this is throughout Central Africa, are white, what is called white, it's actually beige, but it's referred to as white. So we have white, brown, black, and red. Though these colors do have symbolic meaning, it is not the range of colors which is most important, rather the proximity of contrasting light and dark hues. And I've used this textile here as an example of that from Molly Shepard's collection in homage to Africa. It might be my most favorite textile in the collection. Texture variations are used to create visual depth and diversity within a piece. A strong sense of composition allows the embroiderers the freedom to play with these three elements and achieve inventive designs while maintaining overall unity. There are three trends in Bakuba design, one which is based in numbers, in which the Ngongo excelled, and whose style is more concerned with defining measured structures than with artistic expression. However, I think it's a good representation of those sort of measured numerical structures. The second design trend, in which the Shuwa excelled, focuses on visual effects that trick the eye of the viewer. Distinct among Kuba textile designs are that of the Royal Bouchon, which aim for perfect pattern symmetry and attend to a sober, conservative, and hierarchical structure, which mimics the values of their political system. Now that I have detailed the formal qualities of these designs, I will discuss their role in a greater cultural context. Bakuba design must not merely be reduced to its decorative function. According to Moraga, textile arts ultimately represent Bakuba's most versatile, dynamic, and imaginative form of visual expression, and the most important medium for an abstract visual language. Raffia cloth textiles communicate these cultural ideas and concepts through their embroidered design. The visual language that Moraga refers to is the summation of a body of symbols and patterns, and each may be interpreted in multiple ways. Pattern names fall into three categories. The first are names which commemorate a famous individual or the creator of the pattern. The second, pattern names which refer to a part of an object, such as the foot of a chicken. And the third and most abstract naming category are pattern names which refer to the activity of an object. For example, the use of interlocking hooks to symbolize the act of hugging your child. Some Bakuba textile designs fall into a language of patterns called the script. The script is considered a women's language and follows paths, circuits, and systems to express cultural concepts and ideas. The script is used in both textile arts and female scarification practices. According to Georges Morant, a Dutch artist and scholar well-versed in Central African textile design, it can be said that design is a mode of thought which cannot be put into words.
As you see there are so many similarities between the Ethiopian script, the Zulu beadwork, the West African patterns, cloth patterns, that it's just uncanny, from geometric shapes and all this other stuff. And of course, because there's an underlying mathematical thing to geometry, these geometrical shapes have to do with some kind of mathematics. Now, Euclidean geometry cannot create fractals, and these geometry patterns always create fractals because of, if you just copy one side to the other and then you do it over and over again, you start to get fractals. And this is not a small thing. This means that all of these fall under the same geometric style.
The beads are placed in different parts of the body. Certainly, the head is decorated, as we're going to see with some of the crowns, that indicate their role as a priest or a priestess. And then we'll know that they are a priest or a devotee of that divinity because of the color combinations. And this gets into Yoruba concepts of chromatics, of color symbolism, color intention. The Yoruba have three categories of colors. The hot colors, known as the pupa colors, reds and bright yellows. These are the hot colors. At the other extreme are the cool colors, the tutu colors. And that, for the Yoruba, is white. White is coolness, it's supreme coolness. So we have the hot colors at one end. With that kind of introduction, let's talk about the robe.
Okay.
Do you have a question for me?
Do you want to switch to the back or leave the front?
Now, let's leave the front for now.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about it. So this is a royal beaded robe for a king. By its size, probably a king, not a queen. And it's got a whole series of these triangular motifs in panels that you're seeing, along with these concentric circles. And the concentric circles, I think, are kind of a reference in a larger sense to the Yoruba notion of the universe as a gourd, an enclosed gourd, which one half is the spiritual realm and the other half the worldly realm. And those are the things that a ruler has to deal with, social matters as well as spiritual matters. We also see a series of concentric rectangles on one side of
this geometric style might lie at the bottom of the ancient Egyptian writing system, which would be understandable to show why it was so different than all the other writing systems from around the world. And then secondly, it will also help us, these African symbols, to decipher why other ancient Egyptian jewelry and makes have strange patterns all over them that seem to have no meaning, that seem to just be a interlocutor design where you just go, oh, that's a cool design, and you move on. Maybe there's a message there in the back that would have been understood by a more, let's say, uneducated person who wouldn't be familiar with hieroglyphics or the hieratic script. And so he would still have some level of communication.
Boduk T. Edward, a European, actually believed in this idea that the Egyptians and the African symbolism are connected. In fact, he is the guy who depicted the earliest depictions of symbolism, buildings, and all of that of the Asantes. Since he spent so much time with him, he wrote a book about the Asantes. But he also wrote another book, which is about the superstitions and customs of the ancient Egyptians, the Asante, and the Ethiopians, alleging that the symbolism and everything of the customs of the ancient Egyptians are connected. This is way before whatever Africans would ever make this connection themselves in the 1900s. Now, obviously, they made these connections before the 1900s, but this is before that time when it would be popularized all over the world. What he wrote was very specific, making claims that the symbols, because of course he lived at the time where he could be depicted for before the Europeans had taken away a lot of these symbols, he could be told what they meant, and he tried to make connections with them with other ancient Egyptian symbols. So, for example, he shows these symbols of animals and other symbols geometric shapes, and he shows that, oh, they have various similarities with the Egyptians. And he even writes, the houses of the chiefs, they were so rude and disjointed as to exercise my surprise that such uncouth figures could be associated as ornaments with the elegant patterns of the base. For I think two of those figured in the plate may pretend to that character. The rudest cornices, which in my ignorance I despised too much to draw, considered those which shewed grouping and proportion, could alone be interesting, were certainly the most important in the present view. Alvarez described the ancient letters at Aksum as unintelligible to the Abyssinians, which Mr. Salt confirms they hear some resemblance to the mysterious characters at the base of the pyramid at Alexandria as figured in Shaw. I have thus traced the close resemblance, and in my essays the identity of the customs of the Abyssinians and those of the Ashantis, are so that the latter are as evidently descendant from the civilized Ethiopians of Herodotus as the former, especially as the particular which he and Diodorus afford of the custom of the savage Ethiopians are not to be traced at all in those of Ashanti, but actually exist among the Shekans, Jumjums, and the modern Anthropogony of the same neighborhood. I will now show that the Ashantis seem to have preserved the superstitions and customs which the Egyptians, colonists, and visitors introduced amongst them, much more tenaciously than the Abyssinians, who must have abandoned many of their conventions. Notwithstanding the polytheism of the Egyptians, it is urged that they acknowledge but one supreme God, creator and governor of the world, and Plutarch has given us the following inscriptions on the temple of the supreme deity Neith. Now, you could naively say, just look at the pretty pictures and whichever one relates to the other, that's fine. But the problem is, there's symbols, and these symbols have changing shapes, just like how, there's the S sound that used to look like an S, but was actually depicting a T. So you can't just go one for one. Just like in those Benin plaques, you could see there that that symbolic shape that's on the walls, it's lost to others. But he continues to talk about these, speaking about them in hieroglyphic forms. And again, remember, he had direct contact with these things and he was talking with the individuals who made them, so he knows the true meaning behind them. These hieroglyphics assume a much more regular appearance in the Ashanti buildings from the greater facility of working them in plaster, those discovered by Mr. Salt being engraved in stone, of which the Ashanti declare they have none but the iron stone on which their capital is built. The different nature of the new country is one of circumstances detailed by Mainers as conspiring to effect diversity between colonies and the mother country, and the want of the stone must have compelled in some degree the disuse of the Ethiopic characters among the Ashantis, as it precluded the most natural application of them to tombs, as the Aksum and Yeha. I imagine too that the Ashantis, having merely preserved them as architectural ornaments, naturally construct them with a precision and delicacy which injures the resemblance. Now, we can see here that what he's talking about is something where he is talking about a complete transfer from one culture to the other. What might be missed is that he might be hitting on something, but at a wrong angle, which is these symbols might be an earlier start, which branched off from what I would call the motherland of all African kingdoms, Chad, and they would have grown from Chad and then taken different forms in different regions: Ethiopia, the Berbers, West Africa, Central Africa, and Egypt. But For him, he would have not known this back in the day. To him, all he can see is resemblance, and he can see symbols with meaning, and he doesn't understand why they're there. And he then relates them to Egypt, even showing that if you look at the earlier symbols, they had numbers at the bottom. Why would this be the case? Especially if you give the fact that West Africa was not without literature, as we have the other scripts that are there, like the Ajami script, and we also have the Arabic script at the time. So why would these guys keep these symbols present when we and in their proper way and not develop them even further, knowing that they already have scripts that are much more detailed than this script itself? Now, again, I want to stress, I'm not saying that they are 100% related to the ancient Egyptian or anything like that, but it is interesting that there's other people from history that have depicted this. And it's very interesting in the oral way to show this information because, of course, you do not want to hide information in history if somebody wrote it down.